Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. Before we get into the episode proper, I want to give a little programming note here up front. You may have noticed already several podcasts appearing in your feed over the last few days before this one has hit. This is my regular podcast. The other podcasts that I've been doing and will be doing for the rest of the month of August are from the RPGaDay. If you're not familiar with this, it's a month-long celebration of RPGs and playing RPGs, and it involves prompts for each day of the month of August that you can respond to and talk about art and use to talk about RPGs and your experience in RPGs. This year they have a couple of different ways that they've done it in the past, where they've done questions for you to answer, or they've just done like keywords to kind of inspire a blog post or a video or a podcast, which is what I'm doing. And this year they're actually doing, it's kind of both. They have questions or sentences to respond to, but there's a keyword highlighted in each one of those. And what I'm doing this year is I'm using the keywords to kind of inspire me to continue to flesh out the world I'm using in my Tales of the Dragon Slayers campaign that I've been talking about on my podcast. So it ties in with the podcast, it ties in with RPGaDay. I'm going to try to hit one every day. I'm working diligently as of this recording to work up some material. I've got several days lined up that I just have to record. And you should have heard several of those days if you've been following the podcast day by day, since this podcast won't hit until a little later after the month of August has already started. The link to RPGaDay 2023 post on the blog, which is from David Chapman, will be in the show notes. The blog is called autocratic.com with a K on the end instead of a C, but there will be a link in the show notes. The other thing I wanted to mention is in the upcoming calls I'm about to play, they're talking about training. It's something I've been talking about on the podcast for the last couple of episodes, talking about training to advance in levels in old school style games. AD&D specifically is what I'm talking about, but several of the older versions of D&D use training even after you gain your experience points to advance in levels. I've had a good back and forth with Joe from Hindsightless, and Joe has actually now put out a couple of podcasts on his show, which will be linked in the show notes, Hindsightless, continuing to talk about training. And it's generated a lot of conversation between him and myself. I've also heard a lot from Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. You will hear from him later. And the first call we're going to hear is from a gentleman named Jay Martin from Vanishing Tower Press. He has the Vanishing Tower blog. He also has a Vanishing Tower podcast, which it looks like it hasn't put an episode in a little while, but it seems to have a lot of actual plays in it. It's got some actual plays of DC heroes and fantasy games. That's Fantasy Games Unlimited Space Opera RPG, as well as a game of his own making, USR Sword and Sorcery. And there will be links to his blog and his podcast and his Drive-Thru RPG page in the show notes. But let's hear from Jay, first-time caller. And thank you, Jay, for calling into the episode.
Hey, Phantom. Just want to jump in here and talk about training. I think training, I like training. It doesn't really come up in newer school games, and my players are kind of used to newer school games, so I haven't really implemented a training thing, but I like it because it adds downtime. Also, it makes sense, right? if you're going to learn karate, you don't just put on big hands and go hitting things with the side of your hand like SpongeBob, right? You go and learn techniques. And once you learn basic techniques, right, you get that first belt, then you move on to more advanced techniques and you get the next belt and then the next belt and then the next belt. And everything just builds on the stuff that you learn. It's like playing chess, right? Once you learn as you play chess against somebody. And once you beat that person, if you're only playing each other, then now you've surpassed that person and now you're just going to beat them until they beat you again. And it's a process of learning from each other, right? So I think that training is it makes sense, right? Like you were saying. It's not yeah, you can learn stuff by accident out there fighting monsters, but to practice specific techniques, you're going to have someone teach you those techniques. All right, good talking to you.
Thank you again for the call, Jay. And I agree. I think that training does serve to help bake in things that you've learned from being out and adventuring in that context. And I think it also serves as a way to acquire newer skills from someone who is more experienced in what you're doing than you are. So it kind of has a dual purpose, and it does give you that added downtime when you're playing something in a more old school campaign, which can can get in the way depending on if you want to adventure with the same characters every time, but it can also serve to as sort of the kernel, as you said, to downtime and other things that can be done in downtime other than training. Things like, well, building relationships and acquiring gear and acquiring information. And actually, Jason's going to talk about a lot of that in his call right now.
Hey, Pink Phantom, this is Jason. So I paused it before you played Daniel's call here on your latest episode on the halberds and helmets, which I've heard recommendations of that podcast before. I've not listened. I guess I need to remedy that. As far as Joe's comments, I mean, I'm with you. Training definitely has value. We see that in the professional world. We see that with the military. You're not just always out in the field. You're also doing training to work on those specific skills. We see this with professional athletes where they're training specific skills. You can play a basketball game every day, but what's going to improve your 3-point shot, or I don't know, it's sports ball, but where you stand there and throw the ball and it goes in the hoop, right? A penalty shot or something. How do you improve that? You improve that by practicing that. Does a field goal kicker improve? Does a field goal kicker get better by playing in a bunch of football games? Or does a field goal kicker get better by kicking a lot of field goals in practice? You tell me, right? And then the other thing I wanted to mention, as this runs out before I listen to Daniel's call, in the idea of sandbox play and all that, now I've lost my train of thought with gold for XP. Oh, I know. If you want to do true sandbox play, the way to do it is use Traveler. Use original Traveler. There's no character progression mechanically. All the character progression is by getting stuff and making social connections. So if you do that, if you have 0 mechanical increase, then you don't have to worry about it, and sandbox play works. So that's how you fix it. You just play a game without any mechanical increases. Play a superhero game. Play Traveler. And that way you don't have to worry about leveling up, because you level up by what you do in the game with your social mechanisms and getting stuff and making alliances and all that kind of thing. So there you go. Problem solved. Hey, Jason here. Just wanted to call one more time on episode 49 to say that regarding is AD&D the right system to be using for your big battles like this with the bandits and the nomads, you seem to have had a lot of fun using it. From hearing you talk about it, you enjoyed it. So I would posit that it is the right system to use because, solo play is all about you having fun and you having a good time. So if you enjoyed it, then it's well worth the time it took to do it. So great job. Really enjoying your series, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for the kind calls, Jason. I don't think I ever realized that Traveler was a level-less system. I guess now that I think about it, I never heard anybody talk about level Traveler, but I hadn't heard enough about Traveler other than to hear people just rave about it, and of course talk about the character creation process where your character could die during character creation, which I think is cool. Uh, I know that Joe over on the Decahedron podcast, he actually went through the process of creating a Traveler character for with his co-host James, going through that process. So that was very interesting to listen to. And yeah, in that context, it would be the relationships and gear that you acquire and sort of nurture over the course of adventure that would serve as how your character gets better in the world or gets better at navigating their world. And yeah, you know what? I agree. I did enjoy playing mass battles with AD&D. It did take a while, but really, I guess the only thing I would change is I would just be organized a little differently. The cards I used, I kind of had things jumbled around a little bit, trying to fit everything on there. I would probably organize that a little differently. But other than that, yeah, it was a good time, and it was something that I was taking notes as I went, so I kind of knew where I was, so I could leave off and come back to it and pick right back up. So it was a good time, and I said checking out other mass battle systems just because I know I hear folks like Daniel from Bandits Keep talking about chainmail, and there's some video channels that I watch on YouTube that use various systems, and so that's kind of exciting for me because I'm a real wargamer type of guy. But I did enjoy using AD&D. You're absolutely right. That's a great observation, and thank you for the call. And now, more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. In the aftermath of the fight between the Nomads and the Brigands, we've got some things to work out about what happens next. For one, how will the Nomads treat the Brigand lieutenant who surrendered? Are they going to will they take him prisoner and maybe try to turn him in for a reward at the fortress? Will they kill him outright because they've lost 2/3 of their number, and this was one of the leaders of the attack? Will they keep him around and question him about, are there more brigands around? What kind of resources do they have? About magical weapons and armor and things like that they might have on them. And how will he respond to that? Some combination of the three, perhaps. There's also the matter of, what will the brigand cleric, who was the only member of the attack to survive and escape, do when he returns to the place they're using as a lair right now, where they have a handful of followers and a couple of prisoners that they were holding for ransom? Will he just abandon them and go on his way? Will he stay put and wait for the messages for the ransoms to be delivered and see if he can collect on those? Will he maybe chase off the camp followers and just keep the prisoners? That's another thing that needs to be figured out. And who are these prisoners? And what kind of value do they have that they were able to send for ransom for them in the first place? But the first thing we need to talk about is the brigand leader and the brigand lieutenant both had intelligent weapons, chaotic evil intelligent weapons, because they are chaotic evil. And when someone of an unmatching alignment picks up an intelligent sword, they suffer damage equal to the ego rating of those swords. And those swords had high enough ego ratings that any of the regular nomads that picked one up would be killed instantly. And more to the point, the leader of the nomads was reduced enough hit points that if he picked up the brigand leader's sword, he would be killed instantly. So what we're going to have to do here is there were essentially 4 people attacking the brigand leader at the time that he died, including the nomad leader. And in fact, the nomad leader took damage from the last strike the brigand leader used. And he may sense that there is some sort of power behind that weapon, that it was able to do damage to him. So we are going to, for the first time in a while, within the context of the podcast, roll a die and see who picks up that sword. Because someone is going to pick up the lieutenant's sword, and that person is dead. So that the nomads aren't going to have 30 regular nomads left. They're going to have 29. So let's see who picks up that sword. The Dakamiri emerged from battle, battered but victorious. They had bested the brigands, with only one escaping. The lieutenant of the self-appointed Knights of the Green Hills was their prisoner. Cruz Sartma had to use all his influence to keep his men from killing their captive, when he laughed defiantly upon being questioned after 2 more of the dock warriors had died picking up the lieutenant and brigand leader's swords. He had ignored all questions about further hazards from the weaponry and armor of his comrades. So the chieftain ordered his men to gather their fallen comrades and fell trees for a grand bonfire to scatter their fellow dock's ashes to the 5 great winds. When the womenfolk returned from the hills, they insisted on helping. The chief thought to argue, but his first wife, Kandries, made him see reason in it. And it allowed him to assign some of his remaining men to use ropes to gather the bandit bodies in a shallow pit. They too would burn, but incompletely and unhonorably, in hopes the disgraceful Downwind and Worm Mother would consign their souls to the realm of the beetles. Tomorrow he would question the prisoner again, with his warlock's magic to convince him. Perhaps there were some uncursed items they could yet use. Then he may serve as a prize, to be bartered with the fort commander for rights to camp nearby and be less vulnerable to future assaults. And if the brigand lieutenant would not be convinced, he could die and burn with his fellows. One last thing we need to figure out before we can figure out the fate of the brigand lieutenant is whether or not he can resist the charm spell that's going to be cast upon him by the magic user in the nomad party the next day. He's going to need a 14 on a save versus spells or better. Here we go. Well, there we are. At midday of their first day's journey back to the cave, Sir Gus and James came upon the smoldering remains of the 2 great fires amidst torn-up fields. Great battle took place here, Gus stated, awestruck. I guess this explains why those nomads looked so beaten up and worn out, responded James. Not to mention diminished in number, agreed Gus. But their presence among the living would seem to mark them as the victors. And their opponents, wondered James. Probably the brigands we saw earlier, replied Gus. And there, he pointed toward a shallow mass grave. Except for that one, added James. I imagine he gave up some information to be kept prisoner, and the colonel may have a bounty on him, Gus pondered. The wind shifted, and James' nose wrinkled. I don't feel the need to stop for lunch. Agreed, nodded Gus, and they set off down the road in silence. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only. I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only. That's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. Just, I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.